The Titan's Wrath was humanity's latest military experiment, a ship built from technology no one fully understood and materials that had never been tested in combat. The ship was small, not much larger than a standard cargo vessel, but its design was radically different. It had more experimental systems than any fleet admiral would dare to trust, and its crew was made up of misfit soldiers too green or too old for regular service officers who had failed time and again in previous commands, engineers who had been sidelined for their unorthodox ideas. Yet there they were. The Titan's Wrath was about to embark on a routine patrol in the farthest reaches of human space, a place no one expected any real danger to come from. In the command center, Captain Elara Kane stared at the empty void of space on the view screen. She had heard all the rumors about the ship and its experimental systems, how it was a disaster waiting to happen, how it was not ready for real combat. She had heard it all before. Her crew was just as untested and unreliable, according to the brass. But she had been given the ship, and it was her responsibility to make it work. There was no room for failure. She knew she had to prove herself and her crew if they had any hope of surviving what was to come. "All systems are green, Captain. Lieutenant Marcus Dunn said from the communications station, his voice steady, but with a hint of nervousness. "Good," Kane replied, her eyes narrowing as she checked the data feed. "Let's make sure we're not wasting our time out here." It wasn't long before the ship's scanners picked up a strange signal, faint and irregular, at first the sort of thing that might come from a passing comet or an old satellite lost in deep space. But Kane didn't trust coincidences, not with a ship like the Titan's Wrath and a crew like hers. She ordered a course correction, and they moved toward the source of the signal. "What do we have, Lieutenant?" Kane asked as they approached the anomaly. "Still too far out to get a clear reading," Dunn replied, his hands flying over the controls. "But there's definitely something there. It's big, whatever it is. All hands prepare for evasive maneuvers," Kane ordered. She had a bad feeling about this one, that gut feeling she had learned to trust over the years. Seconds later, the sensors began to blare. An incoming fleet of ships appeared out of nowhere, massive vessels, far too large to be of human design. Their shapes were unlike anything Kane had ever seen, and their weapons systems were already powering up. The Titan's Wrath was outgunned and outmatched, a single prototype against an armada. "What in God's name are they?" Dunn muttered under his breath. "Take us to full speed, Lieutenant," Kane barked. "We're not going down without a fight." The ship lurched forward as the crew scrambled to respond to the threat, but they were already too late. The enemy ships fired without warning, the first blast hitting the Titan's Wrath with a force that sent shockwaves through the ship's hull. Alarms blared throughout the vessel. "Damn it," Kane cursed, gripping the edge of her console. "Brace for impact." The crew scrambled to stabilize the ship, but it was clear that they were no match for the enemy's firepower. Yet Kane had never been one to back down. She knew that if they were going to survive this, they had to fight back somehow, and that meant using everything the ship had to offer, even if no one believed it was possible. The Titan's Wrath shook violently as another blast from the enemy ships struck its shields, but Captain Kane didn't flinch. She was already issuing orders. Her crew responded instinctively, scrambling to stabilize their ship and return fire. The bridge was chaos, with officers shouting commands and technicians frantically working to keep the ship in one piece. The overwhelming firepower of the enemy fleet felt like a distant thunderstorm at first, each shot rocking the Titan's Wrath to its core. Yet Kane refused to let her ship become a casualty. She knew the ship's capabilities better than anyone, and it was time to put them to the test. "Prepare the experimental weapons," Kane called out to the weapons officer, Sergeant Lila Tran, who hesitated for a moment before nodding grimly. "Are you sure, Captain? We've only tested them in simulations." "We don't have a choice," Kane snapped. "Fire them now." Tran's fingers flew over the controls as she engaged the ship's experimental weapons system, a series of energy-based cannons designed to disrupt the power systems of enemy ships. Instead of traditional laser blasts, the cannons fired pulses of energy that interfered with the flow of power within a ship's systems. Kane had no idea if it would work against an advanced alien fleet, but they had to try. The first pulse hit a smaller enemy cruiser, and it staggered immediately. The ship's engines sputtered and sparks flew from the hull as the pulse tore through its power core. The cruiser's shields collapsed, and the Titan's wrath followed up with another shot this time. Aimed at its weapons array, the cruiser was left disabled, drifting helplessly in space. "Good hit, Lieutenant," Dunn said, surprised, but a smile started to form on his face. "It worked, Captain." "Keep firing," Kane ordered without hesitation. "Don't give them time to recover." The crew worked together with a sense of purpose that Kane had never seen before. They were no longer a collection of misfits, they were a team, and the Titan's wrath was becoming something far more than a prototype. It was becoming humanity's last hope. The enemy fleet responded, quickly regrouping and preparing for another barrage. But the Titan's wrath was already moving, its engines roaring to life. As Kane used the ship's superior agility to dodge incoming blasts with nimble precision, they weren't as fast as some of the smaller ships, but they were unpredictable enough to throw off the enemy's targeting systems. Kane ordered evasive maneuvers that had the Titan's wrath weaving in and out of fire like a waltz through a battlefield. On the main screen, the larger enemy ships seemed confused as their weapons missed time and time again. Kane's strategy was working. The enemy didn't know how to respond to such an unpredictable opponent. They had underestimated the humans on the Titan's wrath, and that mistake would cost them. The alien ships shifted their formation, trying to close the gap, but it was clear that they were being forced to adapt to human tactics. For the first time, their arrogance was crumbling as they struggled to track and target a ship they had once considered easy prey. "They're panicking," Captain Dunn said, as he observed the enemy fleet's movements. "They didn't expect this." "Good," Kane muttered. "Keep them on their toes." The Titan's wrath continued to strike back, using every weapon and system at its disposal. They took out a few more smaller ships, and the Xoreth fleet began to falter. The tide had shifted just enough to give humanity a fighting chance. But Kane knew they couldn't rest, not yet. The real battle was just beginning, and the Titan's wrath had only just shown what it was capable of. This was no longer a routine patrol, this was survival. The Xoreth fleet watched the small human ship with growing irritation. Their commanders had expected the Titan's wrath to be a quick casualty, but instead it was proving to be a thorn in their side. They had underestimated humanity, and now they were starting to pay the price. Their strategy of overwhelming force had been disrupted by a ship they believed to be unworthy of attention, and that mistake was beginning to show cracks in their armor. On the Titan's wrath, Captain Kane stood at the command center, her eyes locked on the view screen. The damage to the ship had been significant, but it was holding together. For now, the crew was working harder than ever, repairing systems and keeping the weapons running at full capacity. The experimental tech they had been using was proving effective, but they couldn't keep this up forever. The ship was not designed for prolonged engagements, and the Xoreth fleet was still formidable. "We've disabled 3 more enemy ships," Captain Sergeant Tran reported, her voice steady, but with a trace of disbelief. "They're beginning to regroup." "Good," Kane replied, but there was a hint of concern in her voice. "Don't let up. We can't afford to give them a chance to recover." "They've underestimated us," Captain Lieutenant Dunn said, his eyes never leaving his console. "They still think we're a fluke. They're already shifting their focus to the other ships in the fleet." "They won't take us seriously until we make them," Kane said as she turned to face her crew. "We're not just fighting for our survival, we're fighting for humanity's place in the galaxy." The crew nodded in agreement. They had come a long way from being a ragtag group of misfits. Now they were a unified team fighting for something bigger than themselves. They had to show the Xoreth that humanity was not something to be dismissed. Back in the Xoreth command ship, their supreme leader observed the battle with cold indifference. The Titan's wrath had taken out several smaller vessels, but it was still no match for the full might of their armada. The leader's voice echoed through the bridge as he ordered a change in tactics. "Engage the humans with full force," he commanded, his tone sharp and unforgiving. "It's time to crush them once and for all." The order was clear, and the Xoreth fleet began to shift their formation in preparation for a decisive assault. They sent their most powerful warships to surround the Titan's wrath and launched a barrage of concentrated fire aimed directly at the human ship. On the Titan's Wrath, Kane watched as the incoming blasts appeared on the radar. The situation was rapidly deteriorating. They were about to be surrounded. The odds were against them, and reinforcements were still too far out to be of any help. But Kane's resolve only strengthened in the face of overwhelming odds. "Brace for impact," she ordered her crew. "We're not going down without making them pay for every inch of space they try to take." The ship rocked as the first wave of fire hit them, but Kane's voice remained calm and commanding. "Return fire full power to the experimental weapons." The Titan's Wrath unleashed its energy pulses, once more hitting two of the larger enemy vessels, but the Xoreth had learned quickly. Their shields adapted and resisted the pulses more effectively this time. "They've adapted," Captain Tran said grimly. "It's not enough to disable them now. We need to do more," Kane said, narrowing her eyes. "Target their weak points. Find a way to push through." The Xoreth were now engaged in a deadly dance with the humans, but they were still overconfident. They had dismissed the Titan's Wrath as a nuisance, but the truth was becoming undeniable. The humans had made them pay for every misstep, and now the battle had become something far more dangerous for both sides. "You said." The Xoreth fleet was starting to close in around the Titan's Wrath. Their massive warships moved with terrifying precision as they circled the human ship like predators preparing to strike. But Captain Kane refused to give up. Not now, not when humanity's survival hung by a thread. She had spent years training for moments like this, and now she was going to make the most dangerous choice of her life. "We need to take the fight directly to their flagship," Kane said, her voice steady, but with a fierce determination. "If we can take down the Xoreth Emperor, their fleet will fall apart." There was a moment of stunned silence on the bridge. Her crew exchanged looks of disbelief, but it was clear they knew what Kane was asking of them. This was no longer about a simple defense or holding their ground. They were going to launch a suicide mission straight into the heart of the Xoreth fleet. "Captain, that flagship is the most heavily defended ship in their entire armada," Dunn said, his voice full of concern. "We don't stand a chance against it head-on." "We don't have a choice," Kane replied, her gaze unwavering. "If we can disable it, we can disrupt their command structure and throw the whole fleet into chaos. We'll do it the same way we've been doing it this entire time. We'll outsmart them." Sergeant Tran turned to face Kane, her face pale but resolute. "What's the plan, Captain?" "We're going to infiltrate their formation, use the Titan's Wrath agility to slip through the gaps. While they're focused on the other ships, we'll breach the flagship's outer defenses and target their central command system from the inside. We hit them fast and hard and get out before they can retaliate." "It's risky as hell," Dunn muttered, "but it might be our only shot." "It's the only shot we have," Kane said sharply. "Prep the crew for a full assault." The crew moved quickly, each member of the team taking their designated positions. As the Titan's Wrath maneuvered through the Xoreth fleet, they used their small size and speed to slip past enemy sensors and defenses, dodging incoming fire at the last possible second. Kane's pulse was steady, her mind focused entirely on the mission ahead. She knew the odds were slim, but if there was even the slightest chance to turn the tide, she would take it. The Xoreth ships were momentarily distracted by the larger human warships engaging their fleet, giving the Titan's Wrath just enough time to get within striking range of the Xoreth Emperor. The flagship was an imposing sight, its dark hull bristling with weapons and shields, but Kane was already calculating her next move. "Engage all systems," she ordered. "Let's make them regret underestimating us." The Titan's Wrath broke through the enemy's outer line at full speed, unleashing a barrage of experimental energy pulses that hit the flagship's hull with enough force to send shockwaves through the enemy ship. The Xoreth scrambled to respond, but it was too late. The Titan's Wrath was already inside their defenses. "Target the central command node," Kane ordered. "Disable their leadership." Sergeant Tran worked quickly, using every tool available to hack into the Xoreth Emperor's communication systems. The chaos on the enemy ship was palpable as their command structure began to crumble from within. The Titan's Wrath hit them with everything they had, disabling critical systems and causing their weapons to malfunction. "We're inside," Captain Tran shouted. "We've crippled their ability to coordinate." But the flagship wasn't out of the fight yet. Despite the damage, it was still formidable, and it retaliated with a fury that threatened to tear the Titan's wrath apart. "Get ready to pull back," Kane said through gritted teeth. "We've done our job, but we're not sticking around for the fallout." With their mission complete, and the Xoreth Emperor crippled, the Titan's wrath began to retreat back into the chaos of the battle. As the flagship's systems sputtered and died, the Xoreth fleet was thrown into disarray. Their once organized formations broke apart as their leaders scrambled to re-establish control. But it was too late. The seed of doubt had been planted, and now they were no longer invincible. "You said." The Titan's wrath had barely escaped the chaos of the Xoreth Emperor's failing systems. When the battle shifted once more, Kane watched as the alien fleet reeled from the crippling blow to their flagship. But she knew this victory would be short-lived if they didn't act quickly. The Titan's wrath was already heavily damaged. Systems were failing across the ship, and the crew was running on fumes. They had pushed the ship to its limits, and there was no guarantee it would hold together much longer. "We've got about 10 minutes before the power systems begin to fail completely," Lieutenant Dunn reported, his voice tight with urgency. "We're going to have to retreat or risk being caught in the crossfire." But Kane was already thinking beyond escape. She had seen something earlier during the assault, a flicker in the ship's systems, something hidden beneath the surface that hadn't yet been activated, a fail-safe buried deep within the ship's experimental tech. She didn't know what it was or how it worked, but it had the potential to turn the tide once again. "Captain, what are you thinking?" Sergeant Tran asked, noticing the look in Kane's eyes. "There's something more to this ship than we've been told," Kane said, her voice low and filled with realization. "We've only been scratching the surface of what it can do. I don't think the Titan's wrath was ever meant to just survive this battle. I think it was designed to win it." The crew looked at her in confusion, but Kane was already giving orders. "We need to access the core systems now and see if we can unlock whatever's hidden down there," she said. "This ship has more power than we've been using. We need it now." As the crew scrambled to carry out their orders, Kane stood over the command console, her mind racing. She had always known the Titan's wrath was more than just a prototype, but now she understood that it was not just a ship. It was a weapon designed to fight something much bigger than the Xoreth Empire. This was a ship built for a purpose beyond humanity's wildest expectations. "Status report," Kane asked after a long few minutes of tense silence. "We've found it," Captain Tran said, looking up from her console. "There's a power core that was never activated in the initial design. It's not in any of the original blueprints. It's a hidden system that has the potential to amplify our weapons and shields beyond anything we've seen before, but we'll need to reroute power from every other system on the ship to access it." "Do it," Kane ordered without hesitation. "We don't have time to waste." The crew worked furiously to reroute the power systems from the damaged parts of the ship to the core, and as they did, Kane couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to unlock something that would change everything. This wasn't just a desperate gambit anymore. This was humanity's last stand, and they were about to bring out their trump card. As the final connections were made, the Titan's wrath shuddered once again, this time not from enemy fire, but from the immense surge of power now coursing through the ship. The lights on the bridge flickered before stabilizing, and the ship seemed to come alive with a new energy. The weapons systems hummed with deadly intent, and the shields rippled with a strength they hadn't had before. "This is it," Dunn said, his voice awed as he watched the readouts. "The ship's power has quadrupled. We can hit them with everything we've got." "Target the remaining Xoreth warships," Kane ordered, her eyes flashing with newfound confidence. "Let's show them what happens when they underestimate humanity." The Titan's wrath turned back toward the Xoreth fleet now with a power that could shatter their defenses. The crew had no idea what this hidden system would do, but one thing was certain: it was humanity's final weapon, and it was going to be used to its full potential. As the Titan's wrath powered up its experimental systems and charged toward the remaining enemy ships, the Xoreth were completely unaware of the new threat bearing down on them. Their fleet was still recovering from the loss of the Xoreth Emperor, and now they would face something far more terrifying than they had ever imagined. The Titan's wrath roared back into the fray, its engines burning with the intensity of the newly unlocked power core. The ship surged forward like a beast awakened from a long slumber. The crew felt the change immediately. Every system on board felt sharper, more responsive. The ship itself seemed to hum with purpose as the full potential of its experimental systems began to reveal themselves. "We're reading massive energy spikes, Captain," Dunn reported, his voice tinged with awe. "The ship's power is off the charts. It's like nothing we've ever seen before." "Good," Kane said, her voice calm but filled with a steely resolve. "Now let's use it." The Titan's wrath accelerated toward the enemy fleet with blistering speed. Its movements were no longer erratic or desperate. They were precise and deadly. It was no longer a small underdog against a mighty armada. It was a force of nature capable of striking fear into the heart of the most powerful warships in the galaxy. "Target the largest warship," Kane ordered as her eyes fixed on the biggest Xoreth ship, still intact at the center of their formation. "We're going to take down their command ship next." Sergeant Tran's fingers flew over the console as the weapon systems came online with an eerie hum. She input the commands to unleash the full power of the experimental weapons. The ship's energy pulses now had a magnitude that made the previous ones seem like mere sparks. The first shot hit the Xoreth flagship with a force that sent shockwaves through its entire hull. The blast was so powerful that it caused the ship's shields to collapse instantly, and the second pulse tore through its outer armor in an explosion of sparks and debris. The Xoreth flagship reeled from the attack, and in that moment the fleet faltered. The remaining ships tried to regroup, but they were disoriented and struggling to adjust to the new reality. The humans were no longer the underdogs. They had become a devastating force that could no longer be ignored. "They're breaking apart," Captain Dunn said as the Xoreth fleet scrambled to respond to the unexpected onslaught. "Their command structure is in shambles. They're all over the place." "Good," Kane said, her eyes locked on the view screen as she saw the chaos unfolding in front of her. "Keep the pressure on them. Don't let up." The Titan's wrath continued to unleash its deadly energy pulses on the Xoreth warships, each blast causing catastrophic damage to their shields and armor. The alien ships tried to retaliate, but their weapons barely registered against the strengthened shields of the Titan's wrath. Their fire became increasingly erratic and ineffective as their ships began to break apart from within. The Xoreth fleet had underestimated humanity, and now they were paying the price. The Titan's wrath was no longer just a single ship in a battle. It was the focal point of an unstoppable force that was ripping through the enemy armada. "We've disabled 2 more ships," Captain Tran reported, her voice steady, but with an undercurrent of excitement. "They're losing cohesion." "Keep going," Kane said as her hands gripped the edge of her chair. "We're not stopping until we've made them regret every moment they've spent in our galaxy." The Titan's wrath was no longer just a ship. It had become a symbol of humanity's resilience and determination in the face of overwhelming odds. The Xoreth had dismissed humanity as weak and insignificant, but the humans were proving them wrong, one ship at a time. The battle was far from over, but the momentum had shifted entirely in their favor. "We're turning the tide," Captain Dunn said, his eyes wide with disbelief. "They never saw this coming. They never understood what humanity is capable of," Kane said, her voice full of quiet pride. "And now they're going to learn." The Titan's wrath continued its assault, relentless and unforgiving. The Xoreth fleet had no answer for the fury they had unleashed. It was only a matter of time before the last of the alien ships were broken and humanity's victory would be sealed. The Xoreth fleet was on the verge of collapse. Their once mighty armada was now a broken shell of its former self, scattered and disorganized. As the Titan's wrath tore through their ranks with relentless fury, every shot from the human ship was like a hammer blow to the heart of the enemy fleet, and the alien ships were beginning to fall apart one by one. The commanding officers of the Xoreth had made a grave mistake when they underestimated the power of humanity, but now that mistake was about to cost them everything. "Captain, they're retreating," Lieutenant Dunn said, his voice full of disbelief as he scanned the battlefield. "They're pulling back in disarray. They don't know how to counter us anymore." "Don't let them get away," Kane replied, her voice sharp and commanding. "We need to finish this now before they can regroup." The crew of the Titan's wrath had pushed themselves beyond their limits, But now the payoff was within reach. The Xoreth had no more answers for the human ship. Their superior firepower had been rendered useless, and their fleet had been broken apart from within. The Titan's wrath was still standing while their warships lay burning in space. "We can't let them regroup," Captain Surgeon Tran said as she checked the scanners. "There's one more ship trying to escape." Kane turned her gaze to the view screen where the last remaining Xoreth flagship was trying to slip away from the battlefield, its engines roaring as it attempted to jump into hyperspace. "Lock on to that ship," Kane ordered without hesitation. "We're not letting them slip away." The Titan's wrath maneuvered expertly through the chaos of the battle, using its superior speed and agility to get into position. The remaining Xoreth flagship was heavily damaged, but still operational. Its shields were flickering weakly as it attempted to escape the destruction, but Kane knew they couldn't allow it to get away. "Full power to the experimental weapons," Kane barked as she gripped the console. "Target their engines and weapons arrays." The Titan's wrath fired its energy pulses with unrelenting precision. The first shot hit the Xoreth flagship's engines, causing them to flare up and sputter. The second shot struck their weapon systems and crippled them entirely. The flagship tried to fire back, but the Titan's wrath was already on top of them, dodging incoming fire with ease and moving into a final position. "This is it, done," said his voice tense as the targeting systems locked on to the flagship's core. "One last shot." "Make it count," Kane said as her eyes never left the screen. The bridge was silent except for the hum of the ship's systems working overtime to power the experimental weapons to their full capacity. The Titan's wrath unleashed one final devastating pulse of energy directly at the heart of the Xoreth flagship. The blast tore through the ship's defenses and cut straight to its core. In a flash of light, the flagship erupted in a massive explosion, sending debris scattering across space. The Xoreth fleet was finished. The battle was over. "We did it," Captain Dunn said, his voice in awe, as he looked at the wreckage of the last enemy ship fading into the distance. "We've won." Kane stood in silence for a moment, her hands resting on the console. She could feel the weight of the moment settling in. The Titan's wrath had proven itself in ways no one had expected, and humanity had triumphed over an alien empire that had once seemed invincible. "We've won," Kane said finally, her voice steady but full of emotion. "But this is just the beginning." The crew looked at each other as the reality of their victory began to sink in. They had taken down the Xoreth, but the galaxy was still vast and filled with unknown threats and challenges ahead. But for now, the Titan's wrath had earned its place in history as the ship that destroyed an Armada and changed the fate of humanity forever. The battlefield was eerily silent now, save for the occasional drift of debris, as the remains of the once mighty Xoreth fleet floated like broken carcasses through the vastness of space. The Titan's wrath stood in the center of the destruction, its systems humming quietly, but steadily. The ship had endured a brutal trial and emerged victorious. But Kane knew this victory came at a cost. The battle had been fought at the edge of human endurance, and the ship was barely holding together. "Status report," Kane asked as she moved from the command center to the diagnostics panel. Her crew was still recovering from the sheer intensity of the fight, but their determination had never wavered. "We're holding up," Captain Tran replied, though her voice was strained from the damage. "We've got a few critical systems offline, but nothing we can't fix for now." "Good," Kane said with a nod, as she turned her attention to the view screen where the remaining human ships in the fleet were slowly approaching the scene of the battle, their hulls still intact though scared from the confrontation. "Send out a message to the fleet. Tell them we've won. Tell them humanity has a future in this galaxy." A communications officer quickly began transmitting the message, and the crew stood in quiet anticipation as the words spread across the vast expanse of space to the scattered human ships and colonies that had been watching from afar. "Message sent, Captain," the officer said after a few moments. "And the rest of the galaxy," Kane muttered to herself, the weight of the victory settling on her shoulders. It wasn't just the humans who had been watching. It wasn't just humanity's future at stake. The Xoreth had been a powerful force, but there were other threats out there, and they would surely take note of the Titan's wrath and its crew. "The Xoreth have been defeated," Kane said as she addressed her crew one final time. "But this battle has made it clear that we've only just begun to fight for our place in the galaxy. We have proven that humanity can stand toe-to-toe with the most powerful forces in the universe, and we will not be easily broken." The crew stood silent, each person knowing that the victory they had achieved wasn't just for them, it was for every human who had been oppressed or threatened by forces beyond their control. They had fought not just for their survival, but for the survival of every human who came after them. "We've made history today," Dunn said, his voice quiet but filled with pride. "We've proven that we're not just a footnote in the galaxy, we're here to stay. And we'll fight to make sure we're not forgotten," Kane replied, her voice firm with purpose. The crew nodded in agreement, and the Titan's Wrath began to power up its engines once again. The ship was damaged, but still intact, and as they left the wreckage of the Xoreth fleet behind them, they knew their journey was far from over. They had shown the galaxy what humanity was capable of, but now the hard part began. The fight for a place among the stars had only just begun. As the Titan's Wrath sped into the unknown, the crew knew they would face new enemies, new challenges, and new opportunities, but they would face them as one unit, a unit forged in the fires of war and united by the belief that humanity's future was worth fighting for. "We'll make our mark on this galaxy," Kane said as the ship disappeared into the stars, "and it will be a mark that no one can erase." The Titan's Wrath sailed forward into the great unknown, ready to shape the future of humanity among the stars.